Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Vienna Institute for Global Studies launch of the Latin American Index. My name is Zoltan Ach, and I'm the director of the Institute. And I would like to do a couple things today before we get into the program. Let me give you a quick overview. Some of you may be new to this and don't know this. The Institute was set up 2 years ago. We're sort of 2.5 years into it almost now. And we started with a very ambitious idea, trying to figure out how to get us through the next 25 years, right? We're in the middle of more changes than you can imagine. And some business consultant said to me, he goes, well, the world is like this. In business schools, we teach a 2-by-2 model of, good, bad, how to think about a business, and then try to push it to the right quadrant. He said, the problem today is the ground underneath is moving. And therefore, there's no way to push us to the correct quadrant. And so the Institute was set up to try to figure out if we can try to understand what we can do to move us forward without blowing up the world. And we focused on 3 things: technology, broadly defined, well-being, and international relations. And I thought those 3 sort of fit together. And they did. But as we've progressed, we've focused on a couple of things that have come out that have become interesting as we have thought about this. And one of them is education. Now, if you look at the history of the world, almost everybody argued that education was one of the most important things. If we educate people, we become more civil, and then we're no longer these primitive people that just kill each other. Now, we still do a lot of that, but we do less than we used to. And in this, we have identified a real problem that needs to be fixed. If you go back 250 years, right, late 1700s, there were great men that understood many different disciplines and could help sort of figure out global problems easily, that cut across disciplines, both social and physical. In my field, economics, Adam Smith, who people sort of know who he was, right, was a moral philosopher, but, he understood economics, political science. He may have known math, I don't know. And there were a lot of these people. And then in economics, around 1870, we had something called the marginal revolution, where we split economics up, right? We took political economy that was about how economies transition and change, how their structure evolves. And we threw that aside, left it to sociologists. And economics focused on prices, and how prices are determined. And all of you that studied economics know it was a terrible subject. You hated it. But anyway. And then over the years, that discipline of economics splintered into a whole bunch of other sub-disciplines, right? International trade, labor economics, statistics, right? And this happened in every discipline. So today, the university is characterized by tiny subdisciplines and scientists, physical or social, only understand a little thing. That wouldn't be a problem except for one thing. We have huge, complex problems in the world today. And I don't need to tell you what they are. You can name, 10 of them on 2 hands. And the solution for all of these needs knowledge that transcends a discipline. Right? Economists can't solve global warming. Right? The physicists can't solve global warming. Right? It's a complex problem. And so what is needed is nothing other than the remaking of the university. Now there's a real problem. No university wants to be remade. Right? Anybody that's ever been in academia knows trying to introduce one new course, right, is a nightmare. To try to introduce a new major is close to impossible, and trying to introduce complexity science into any discipline is impossible. And so what we've come to realize is we need to train a whole new set of researchers that are polyhistorical and that can operate across different disciplines. And you can't do this in the existing university for the same reason you can't introduce new technologies into old structures, right? There's this question I used to always ask people or students, I say, why do we need new firms when we have 5 million in one country? And nobody knows the answer. But you can't put old wine, or you can't put new wine into old bottles. That's a good way to put it. And so what is needed that we see to help solve the global problems that we're facing is the creation of a program that trains people in complexity science, right? Because complexity science will help you understand many different disciplines and be able to deal with solving these problems. So we're fortunate in Vienna here. There's a complexity hub. It has 150 complexity scientists doing research, but they can't give a PhD program because they're not a university, right? And none of the universities want to have a PhD program in complexity science because they can't decide what department to put it in. Seems like a simple problem, but not. So we have stumbled across a great opportunity. We're going to try to put a PhD program in complexity science into Modul University, the cooking school. So when we first approached the hub, they were very skeptical. They said, Modul, oh yeah, the cooking school. And we said, no, we want to do other things. And Carl, the president of Modul, went and sat down with the chancellor of the Complexity Hub. And I said, Carl, you want me to come? He goes, no, Zoltan, we're going to have coffee and speak German. So I said, good. Well, they met, and they talked for 2 hours. And the president of the hub said, let's consider if we could put a PhD program in complexity science into Modul University. And that has now progressed where Modul is going to apply to be a member of the hub. They have to be invited, right? It's a club. And we have been working with Serb and some other people, Hilton Root, who's a complexity expert on this. And so I think, right, we've identified an interesting way to try to think about global problems. And the Institute is playing an important role in this. because we're not constrained by bureaucracy yet, right? It'll happen sooner or later. Anyway, right, this leads me to, right, one of the main products of the Institute, right, is this Global Digital Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Index, right, where we're actually able to measure, right, what is happening in technology around the world, right? We have this for 170 countries for 8 years now. And it's not big data, it's little data, because we only have a few thousand variables, but that's okay. And we launched the global index in the fall, and then we did one for the Danube Valley. And we have here now the Latin American index. So what we're going to do is we're going to have 8 of these, right? So that in each region of the world, we can get a greater insight, right, into what is happening in that region. So we're going to do the Middle East, we're going to do Africa, we're going to do Southeast Asia, South Asia, which is India, basically, the United States, and Europe. And then, right, this index is updated every year with new data, and the data is used by researchers, so we have a research network. These reports are policy-oriented to get people to think about it, so on and so forth. So anyway, and you know, this fits into this sort of complexity way of thinking, because you can also introduce complexity science into this index to give you greater insight into the world. So let me tell you one of the things we found, which is really interesting, is both the United States and China focus on startups and scale-ups. Europe focuses on regulation and privacy. And you know what? You can't make any money selling regulation. It's a real problem. And so the index is interesting. So anyway, we have 3 people here that worked on this, maybe 4, on this Latin American index. So an old friend of mine, Ernesto, that I've known for, I've known him for longer than some of you have been alive, right? Who's at the Mexico the Monterrey Institute of Technology, I think they changed the name, in Mexico. So he was working on this. Esteban, who I've known for half that time, who's in Costa Rica, but spent a lot of time in Spain and Barcelona, great researcher, and Sir Blaslo, my longtime friend for 25 years. You know, him and I have been working together that most people have been married. And we haven't had a fight in 25 years. I think we had one almost, right? And Stefan sitting here, who's our postdoc, brilliant young man. Someone said if we had 10 of them, we would be MIT. But we can't find 9 other ones. So anyway, we're going to have Ernesto and his team present it, and then we'll have a little round table. So anyway, let me turn this over to...
Thank you very much. Put it here. Where's the pointer? Yeah. Thank you very much. Afternoon. Thank you, Sultan. Thank you. Yes, it is true. Some of us decided to work on this index, and when I was invited, I was very happy to be part of this idea. It's exactly what Sultan said. The point is to try to disseminate policy-oriented ideas to help people understand what is happening in different regions of the planet and how to understand those problems, okay? Today, we're very focused on Latin America, and the idea, before talking about the region, I think it's important to briefly, very briefly, try to integrate the concept of why the digitalization of the economy matters, okay? Everybody talks about technologies, nice. Everybody talks about digital technologies, fantastic. But why the digitalization of the economy should be put at the heart of any thought of any policymaker or any scientific activity, okay? Sultan mentioned a couple, okay? But the very good point at the center of the discussion is that technological innovation has been proven now is reinforced by more recent data, is highly correlated with economic growth in territories at any level. And that's the important thing here. And that includes general purpose technologies or any other technology with a digital connection, okay? This is known. It wouldn't be useless, it would be useless to talk about what is already on the table and is validated. Instead, we think of something that is a little more complex, connected to the complexity idea that Sultan presented. Something that is also changing with the digitalization of the economy is the process of entrepreneurship. What is around the entrepreneurial process, from ideation to full implementation, is also changing. It's being altered by these technologies, okay? In many different ways. Entrepreneurship used to be a local phenomenon driven by a person or a small group of persons, and that has changed with the technology. With the technology in place, now entrepreneurship is unbounded, geographically speaking. It's no longer a one-man show. You can partner anyone around the globe. You can, not that easily, but you can identify skilled people in different geographies and come together with a business idea. That is fantastic, actually, okay? And this creates greater complexity into this process that it used to be, let's say, much simpler, more local, okay? And that complexity is what we're trying to address with these reports. Every region is facing different environmental conditions, different market conditions, even different levels of digitalization, okay? What counts here, it's more than a tech story. It's the connection between this complexity and the entrepreneurial process and what is around it, this umbrella, okay, this institutional umbrella that we call the digital entrepreneurial ecosystem, okay, and those processes, especially the outcome of those processes, okay? If we just turn the page to this concept, to the digital entrepreneurial ecosystem concept, from an abstract perspective, we're talking about the operating system of the digital economy, okay? It is there, it is shaped by different actors in different intensities, okay? At different speeds too. And now it's involving more actors. From governments, Sultan said, I tend to regulate or desire to improve the conditions in these markets, to entrepreneurs who try to exploit or capitalize on these technologies, users who benefit more from the developing of more technological-oriented goods, services, etc., and platforms, okay? Digital infrastructures, etc. Yeah, it's now a multi-layer scenario, okay? So it's more complex. Complexity in this case also matters, especially for these. That is far beyond the canonical approach to to put entrepreneurship or digitalization next to the economic outcome. Here we're talking about something else, okay? Something that is more complex. And obviously, it's trying to summarize, but still preserves the complex nature of the phenomenon that is being put on the table, okay? This is the idea. Because this particular ecosystem basically now has the capacity to turn technological or digital capacities into sustainable, inclusive, or even a more diversified or technologically advanced industrial fabric, okay? And we need this kind of knowledge. Understand how this works in the real world is important, okay? Not only to have a picture of how the economy is behaving in terms of digital depth, for example, among many other topics, but also in terms of this inclusiveness, okay? From an abstract perspective, this is what we're trying to analyze. From a practical point of view, we basically focus on a whole system that includes different players, many players, okay? Again, we have the providers of digital infrastructures, no? Connectivity, broadband, cloud computing, digital rules, regulation in this case, etc. Okay? We have users who basically develop digital skills, who can basically benefit from different digital rights, privacy, access to digital services, and so forth. Okay? We have platforms who are basically connected to the networking function, to the matchmaking function in the economy, and to the development of digital services, including financial services, okay? Digital always. And the digital entrepreneurs, who are more in connection with the startup function, the scale-up function, and why not, the absorption capacity of digital technologies. These functions are important. I call them functions just because from an economic point of view is what they are, okay? It's the combination of different inputs producing a certain output that can be complex or less complex, and this is what we try to do, okay? From a practical point of view, just to briefly explain how this works, okay? We're not going to get into the technicalities or the details because that is another debate. The important thing here is what is happening in the region, okay? What can we get out of the results, okay? Sultan mentioned this report focuses on Latin America, and it's a region. Ernesto is obviously the obvious candidate to present this because he's the expert. But the idea is that we're talking about a large region, incredibly large, over 650 million people, okay? With an incredible diversity, shared history, but facing many structural problems that materialize in different gaps that obviously have been trying to be addressed, sometimes with more success, sometimes with less success, okay? And to present the main results, I would like to invite Ernesto, that is now taking the floor. Thank you, Ernesto.
Yeah. Thank you, Esteban.
No, please.
Thank you. And I also want to extend my gratitude to all the team behind this big effort in Vienna Institute of Global Studies, obviously Sultan, that we have a very strong professional relationship from many years working around entrepreneurship and different indicators for many years. Obviously, Laszlo, that also share a lot of common research, and now the opportunity to have this general overview about what is relevant for Latin American Caribbean region, as Esteban just mentioned it. Even we have a strong common heritage coming obviously from an Hispanic background in terms of economical, cultural development, but the region experiment in the last years different paths. That is also very interesting to see how this is shaping a specific, not only entrepreneurship activity, but the combination with the technology, how the digital infrastructure technology is also shaping new venture activity. So, oops. Yeah. as just Esteban mentioned, Latin America is a big region, connected, but also uneven, because it's important to take in account how this the digital entrepreneurial ecosystem is strictly working. No, so this is also very relevant to take in account that the problem is not the technology per se. How we can just combine these new technologies with the idea to shape specific new venture activities, okay? There are a lot of technologies that could be just transferred to the business activities, that is okay, but at the same time, if we review historically the economic activity of Latin America, we have a lot of entrepreneurial efforts, but many of them are in the informal sector, low value added, and are not well connected to the global value chain. And the technology could help these entrepreneurs to be transformative. The problem, as we can see, is not this strong connection, and this is something that we want to, to highlight. If we want to turn digital adoption into the idea of innovation, lead growth. This is the relevant thing here. It's not to be connected. We are now practically around the world very well connected because there are a lot of technologies that facilitate these processes, including, from your mobile phone to internet connection. And today, practically many of the regions in Latin America are illuminated by different technologies. And this is not a big issue today, fortunately. The idea is how to be or move to getting online into entrepreneurial momentum. That is something that is very relevant. So some countries are improving a lot in the last years, and if we compare the ranking that we can make with the index, we can see that 3 countries, Chile, Uruguay, and Brazil, are performing really relatively well in terms of combine the use of this technology with the entrepreneurship ecosystems and are moving in a relatively good manner. Now, there are some followers like Argentina, Costa Rica, and Mexico that are in this second tier, that even though the index is in the middle of the table, there are big opportunities to reach and close the gap. And unfortunately, there are a lot of different small countries, mainly in the Caribbean area and in Central America, that they cannot make the catch-up and obviously present a lot of institutional voids with the lack of formal institutions that don't permit that this technology could be transferred in a positive way to the entrepreneurial or new venture activities. That is the case of Haiti, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, and Venezuela that are in the top, in the bottom of the table of the figure here, okay? So, as you can see, there are a huge diversity around the countries in the region, but the idea is how we can close these gaps in order to make more sure this digital division or digital divide among the region. As we can see here, in the last 5 years that we have measures, Chile is still the #1 in terms of digital entrepreneurship ecosystem indicators because Chile is doing relative well work. What exactly happened in Chile? It's a relatively small country in terms of population, but a more clear rule of the game, more clear policy, and more clear entrepreneurship ecosystem that help, okay, the transfer from the technology to new ventures. What is the problem? What is the COMAS, the structural problem of Chile, even though have the largest indicators in our DEE Index? That is a small country, okay? And they need to transfer many of these new ventures into the internationalization process. But a very interesting case in terms of how to do good things to connect digitalization, entrepreneurship and good policy is probably the benchmark to follow in Latin America. As we can see in the last years also, Uruguay make a good improvement, and Brazil is another interesting case, because this is a big economy. It's the largest economy in the region, and also with a lot of political changes, they try to maintain the impetus. What rules there? The size of the market. Okay, and because the size of the market, there is a lot of entrepreneurial spirit that using these technologies to improve in some specific industrial sectors. For example, fintech, e-commerce, and logistics. So in the case of Brazil, the relevance to have a big market enhance and improve part of the entrepreneurship ecosystem, combining with the use of new technologies. The follow-ups, Argentina, Costa Rica, and Mexico, is a combination. Argentina and Mexico are relatively big markets. Costa Rica, a relatively small market also, but with a lot of foreign direct investment in terms to the use of some specific technologies. Okay, and as we can see, the running up in the top 10 is Peru, that improved a lot in the last years, basically again, because Peru is having a lot of foreign direct investment, mainly to improve the logistics sector, okay? And with this logistics sector also try to help local commerce, and the local commerce are using new technologies, e-commerce, in order to have a more sophisticated relative market, okay? So what is the idea here? Make the catch up, but also how we can also use the story of persistent stratification and try to see how the rest of the countries of the region can improve relative well. So we gain in terms of access. Sultan just mentioned it, and Esteban mentioned, there is a lot of new technologies that all the world are, improving relative well. But the problem is how we can also help the startup dynamics here, okay? One of the big problems is, digital user citizenship grow relatively fast, okay? But lowest the number of entrepreneurs that are using the digital technologies. Again, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, but not so many of them are using in an effective and correct way all the advantage of these new technologies, okay? Because they maintain small, they are not scaling up, and they maintain a lot of informal activities. So the important message here, how we can expand this digital participation, but at the same time help entrepreneurs to be more digital also. And as we can see here, networks improve a lot. It's not a big issue around infrastructure, but for example, in terms of where is finance here, okay? Financial facilitator, even there is an improvement, it's the lowest indicator here in terms of something that we consider the big bottleneck, okay? So again, privacy, security, and networks improve a lot. Many governments in Latin America are doing a very good job in order to maintain regulations, policy that help the equation around technology. This is okay. Many people, the citizenship are now very well connected. This is okay. But how we can transfer this into entrepreneurship, this is the thing that is not so clear today, okay? And again, Latin America, it's moving very fast to be a hub when the digitalization continue growing for all the citizenship. That is perfect, okay? But again, how we can use this advantage to move into new ventures that are more connected with these new technologies and improve the business models with the use of technology. This is our gap. This is the things that we need to take in account in order to move this advantage into high growth firms. This is for us the main gap. And some of the message here that is also very important to take in account is this structural gap, okay, is digital inclusion plus innovation-led new ventures in order to make a more strong ecosystems. And also, we need, and it's something that we want to enhance, entrepreneurs that could be competitive, not only in the local market, but also globally. As also Esteban mentioned, digital technologies is a good tool to be connected in the international arena. This is something that we can also try to enhance when we compare. And this table summarizes pretty well what exactly happened here. If we look for knowledge-intensive sector, and when we compare with other geographies like here in Europe or the United States, obviously there is big gaps here, okay? How we can reduce the gap and how we can also, you know, try to make a more equilibrium between an economy that is fundamental based in resource-based extractive activities to be more knowledge-intensive sector, okay? And this is something that we define like the winter, I don't know, the digital winter in the region, because in the last years, probably at the same time of COVID-19 pandemic, many of venture capital, for example, move around emerging economies, including Latin America, because it was an effervescent movement around, for example, fintech and e-commerce. So we receive a lot of VC capital, and this is also very interesting to see, and it's in the report, okay? But just ending the pandemic period, many of these activities very decreased in terms of the dynamics. So not so many new ventures can capture the expectation of the venture capital in order to be more attractive and enhance and improve the business models using specific digital technologies. And this is something that is highlighted in the report. And again, one of the most important things is the fragmented markets and a lot of informal economy in the region. That probably is one of the things that we need to, you know, understand pretty well in order to move forward this capacity, okay? With exception of Mexico, all the economies, the rest of the economies in Latin America, strong depend on resource-based extractive activities. Only Mexico is the one single economy, and you know why? Because we are just behind United States. Could make this change to be more in high-tech manufacturing, okay? But it's the only country in the region that make the transformation, okay? What is the idea? Use new technologies to move to knowledge-intensive sectors, use our capacity, relative strong markets in order to improve not only a specific industrial sector that is obviously okay, but again, how we can add more value via entrepreneurship to compete in the global value chain and use all the advantage that these new technologies offer to the new ventures, to the entrepreneurs of the region. So to make the final conclusions, please, I return the mic to Esteban.
Thanks, Ernesto. No, I can stay. In this conversation, there are two messages. I mean, in the report there are many messages. Ernesto presented a lot of results, but there are like two main messages. There are some good news and bad news. Okay, there's always good news and bad news. The good news is that the region has made some progress. Laws have been approved. Mechanisms to enforce them have been developed. And that is positive. Connectivity and digital rights have improved too, okay? That is important. The problem is, unfortunately, the startup capacity of these territories, or the people living in these territories, and the scale-up capacity of the newborn organizations within these territories is very limited. whether they are using obsolete business models developed for the physical world to adapt them to or implement it in the digital world, or because they couldn't meet market expectations, that's very simple. Regardless, the underlying mechanism, we know that this structural problem is revealing the structural gap in front of the region. The region, in terms of the next move ahead, has to do with entrepreneurial activation. It's like the engine is off and they try to turn the engine on, but they can't for many reasons, okay? And this is the ecosystem activation that the region is lacking, okay? Connectivity is good, the car is good. The institutions are in place. The fuel tank is full. The driver needs to know how to turn the engine on. This is what the region is missing, okay? Put him in this way, in this analogy, okay? The problem is to teach people to drive, okay? In the digital world. It's not an easy task, okay? In this case, another important message, the second part of the message, is that policy also needs to learn how to drive his own car, okay? Canonical approaches targeting single actors, waiting for sort of a spillover or a spread effect or a domino effect is no longer valid, okay? Now we are dealing with very complex, very diverse, especially diverse actors with different interests too. So policy should be more focused on developing actions that, let's say, impact different actors. To a greater extent, to a lesser extent, that is a different story, but the policy isomorphism is no longer valid, okay? We need to focus on multi-actor policies. In the complexity world that we live in today, that is increased by digitalization, this is improving, this is important, okay? And understanding the design of actions in one territory, large economies, no, like Mexico or Brazil, that are huge economies, over 100 million people economies, just do the math. It's not the same as the policy you should design or implement in small places, in 3 million, 4 million, 5 million countries, okay? The contextual factors are different, the environmental conditions are different, the market conditions are different. So isomorphism is no longer valid, okay? And in this mix, the other problem that the region has, it was identifying this in the report too, is the weak market integration. The region is not integrated in any way, okay? Countries don't follow or don't try to go through the same highway. Everybody goes on their highways. They believe all the highways take you to Rome, okay? But nobody knows that. But every country has its own agenda, which is okay. Don't get me wrong. That is not a problem. The problem itself is the poor integration. So there is no coordination. For example, for global value chains or global supply chains, this is critical, this is important. If you don't have a coordinated set of actions, countries cannot, obviously, again, coordinate their businesses in logistics, in distribution, or in terms of platforms, etc. So what is valid in one country is perfectly not valid in other. You don't have coordination. So you're limiting the capacities of your digital space, let's say, okay? And this is another issue that was identified in this report, okay? The region doesn't need more fancy headlines, okay? What the region needs is ignition, an entrepreneurial momentum, okay? And these are the main messages, okay? Good news and bad news. And this policy need, okay? This redefinition of the policy design, okay? Those were the single messages that we wanted to transmit in this conversation, okay, in the form of presentation. In that sense, I would like to thank you all for coming and listening, especially, okay, and thank you, Ernesto, for being here too, Sultan. Thank you very much. Sultan? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, let's come up here.
No, you keep
Oh, no, I got another one here.
Okay. There are two other mics. Yeah, to share with me and for myself. Maybe I need it. Yeah, don't worry. Thank you. Thank you, Leah.
Well, there's one thing that I know. There's not a huge interest in Latin America, right? It's not just that we have a smaller audience here. In general, when you speak about development, globalization, the world, Latin America is not forgotten, but it's just not noticed, I think. With the exception of Mexico, right, because it is close to the US. And you know, when you look at the numbers and everything, one thing I noticed, the level of development, certainly in per capita GDP, et cetera, is sort of like Central Europe. You know, 25, 30,000, the bigger countries, which is about the same as Hungary or Romania, Poland. So that level of development is about that level. So let me say a few things. I'm no Latin American expert, but I've learned a couple things over the years about it. And let me start with this story. We had an earlier version of the Digital Entrepreneurial Index called the Global Entrepreneurship and Development Index. It was almost the same as this without technology, right? Because in 2000, 2005, you know, people still didn't fully embrace digital technologies. So we had this index. It was actually very interesting. It was one of the few ways to think about entrepreneurship and innovation globally. And Serb and I invented that, I was going to say in Romania, but we were visiting there. That's the first time we talked about it. And we spent a couple of years putting it together, and we launched it in Washington, D.C. at the Heritage Foundation in collaboration with the University of Page, Imperial College London, and George Mason University. And we focused the launch both on the global index and on Latin America, specifically Mexico. And we invited people from the Mexican embassy and some local economists that understood Mexico. So I gave this interesting talk. And, you know, at that point, what motivated us to do this index was this view that by 2050, the world's population will be approaching 10 billion, sort of a structural demographic view of the world. And the question was, will by 2050 the extra 2 billion people become migrants and terrorists and overrun the world? Or will they become what I called Jedi warriors, which is entrepreneurs trying to fit into the global economy? Now, here's what was interesting. We know what the world looks like in 2050 from the point of view of population, because there's data on all of this. And the answer is by 2050, 90% of the workers will be in developing countries, right? Because we know what's happening in the developing world. Women aren't having enough babies. There's a decline in population. And by 2050, 60% of the developed world will be over 60. It's going to be a terrible place. Everyone's going to be old, right? And all the people in the developing world will be under 25. And so the question was, right, how do we create investment, education, training, and entrepreneurship in the developing world to basically put us on the right track in the 21st century? And I don't know if we're in a better position or not than we were 20 years ago. But that was the motivation why we did the Global Entrepreneurship and Development Index, right? And it gave us real understanding of what was happening. So we had the launch, I presented the data, and the weakest point in Mexico was both product innovation and process innovation, right? Two of the things that were the strongest in the US, for example. And so I apologized to the audience, and I said, you know, sir put the data together badly, and I think he missed something, I'm just kidding, that these must be wrong. And the representative from Mexico says, no, Zoltan, that's correct. And I said, why is it so bad? And he gave me a great answer. He said, there's no reason to innovate either in product or processes in Mexico. I said, why not? He said, oh, we have a monopoly in all these industries, and whatever we make, we can sell. And when you buy new machinery, he goes, we don't even open the box. We just let it rot there. And I'm like, can that be really true? And the guy says, yeah. You know, in many industries, there are family monopolies that don't innovate. There's very little competition. And of course, what's happened in the last 20 years, I think competition has increased, right? And so some of these structures have broken down. And so anyway, right, that's sort of an insight into Latin America. I had another encounter that was almost as interesting. Right after the transition in 1992, there was a big conference in Rio, sponsored by the United Nations, on the new international economic order, right? And so I was invited to that. I don't know why, right? It was all important people. And I was the discussant to the Brazilian ambassador's paper. Now, you have to keep in mind, in the 80s, I spent a lot of time in Japan studying why the Japanese are so successful, right? And the Brazilian ambassador gave this talk about how Brazil will be the new Japan. And, you know, I'm thinking, well, in Japan, everybody finishes high school, and they know calculus, math, statistics, and physics. That's why they're such good workers. And I knew this. In Brazil, many people finish 6th grade and don't go on to further education. Now, it's changed, right? And so when the ambassador gave this talk, I said, you know, Brazil will never be Japan because people here aren't educated. I probably should have qualified it. And he said, I went to Harvard, we're educated. I said, what about the workers? He says, well, that doesn't count. They didn't understand or wouldn't acknowledge that educating people is the most important vehicle of development. And what's the most important is not college education, right? It's good high school education. That is the key. And so let me finish on this note. I know this about Latin America. Huge investments were made, right, in infrastructure, in roads, in all the basics. And then there was a great push to try to improve education. And so let me ask this question. Has Latin America made real progress in education in the last 20 years?
Wow. Unfortunately, no. And this is a strong gap. Higher education improved a lot, but it's a sort of elite play.
Right.
Okay? We have outstanding universities. Few of them are very, very good if you compare with other universities here in Europe and the United States. So at least good public and private universities are improving a lot. The structural problem is the basic school, and now moving because probably we have in Latin America an extra demographic bonus, but not so much. But these people are moving to the high school, and there is a huge gap there, very huge gap there. So because, again, there is a digital gap between large amount of population that could have access to a mobile phone, that is, again, is not a problem. You could have an internet access or a computer, but the literacy, the readiness to use this technology is a huge gap.
Yeah.
It's a huge gap. And this is a reflect of one of the structural problems in Latin America. That is probably the region in the world with a huge difference, between the people that have more incomes to the lower one. Okay, the Gini, the Gini Index, there's the difference between the top and the lowest levels in socioeconomical terms is the largest in the world. Yeah. It's the largest in the world. It's terrible. And this is reflected also in education system.
You know, I know this, and it's a huge issue. And when you look at Southeast Asia, right, versus Latin America, in Southeast Asia, there's a huge emphasis on education. In South Korea, families spend 40% of their disposable income on education, right? And you see this, the reason they're able to embrace these digital technologies is because the population is relatively educated, and they spend a lot of money on this. And in Latin America, this hasn't happened at the level it should have happened. So let me ask the different question. There is tech development in Latin America, I know that. What are the places that are actually doing a good job with this?
Well, we can both answer. These hubs, these digital hubs, are basically concentrated in 4 specific places, cities. Cities, there are cities, except one that is more than a city, but it doesn't matter. Because in Mexico and Brazil, there are huge hubs, specialized in car making, maybe, okay? And it's good because it's part of the high-tech manufacturing hub, okay, that we talked about before. In Buenos Aires, in Argentina, and Santiago, in Chile, there are tech hubs too, but they are different. They are more in financial services, I believe, and they also they're demonstrating great capacities, okay, with the same problems of the market size, etc. But in their play field, they are doing a pretty well job. And there's another hub of medical devices and Intel, in particular Intel. Intel has a factory, a chip factory, and there's like 20 medical devices companies in a cluster in one of the regions in Costa Rica, okay? And when you check these countries, yes, few similarities. You have 2 large economies, the largest. You have 2 medium-sized economies, no? Argentina and Chile, And then you have a small piece of land there that is in the middle of nowhere. No? Economically speaking, similarities are hard to find. In terms of activity, it's also hard to find because you have car makers, sophisticated car makers, financial services, medical devices, and Intel. Okay? In Mexico and in Brazil, these hubs account for, I have no idea, but I'm sure it's less than 10% of the economy, which is another important point. In Argentina and Chile, I'm pretty sure it's the same number, okay? The only exception is a matter of market size, but it's the same. I mean, the size of these hubs in the economy is still tiny. The real contribution to the economy of these hubs is very small. And that is also a consequence of the play field, no? Of these characteristics of the environmental conditions, on the regulation itself, etc., no? And the fragmentation of the market. It's true, Latin America is not perceived as a region. It's perceived like 20 countries there or something. That each plays its own game. Yeah, because it's fundamentally right. It is fundamentally wrong not to see the region as a region, but it's fundamentally right to see 20 plus fragmented countries or 30 fragmented countries, because each country has its own rules. It's hard to negotiate using the same conditions in two different countries in the region. So it's, geographically it's a region, economically it is not.
You know, I was in Chile a couple of times with the GEM project and invited to talk. And I remember giving this talk about entrepreneurship, startups, innovation. And some minister said to me, you know, Zoltan, that's really interesting. He said, but you know, if we need some more money, we'll just dig out a little more copper and sell it to the Chinese. He said, it's much easier. And I think that attitude, right, we saw in the numbers, persists. It's much easier to do that. You know, these tech startups and stuff, it's not easy.
No, and it is true. So in many countries, the majority, with the exception of Mexico, extractive industries maintain a huge percent of the total economy. Fortunately, some countries are in this, transition to be a little more integrated in terms of not only commerce, but also the use of some specific technologies. And also because today, with these geopolitical changes, independently that the region are receiving a lot of foreign direct investment from different countries, including United States, Europe, and China, and transfer some important technologies to the region in terms of, manufacturing, but a little more sophisticated technologies also, biotech, or, some specific facilities around IT. That is also very interesting. The nearshoring idea are still running around. Many of the things that are important to take into account is obviously for many, many years, just extract something, could be copper, could be oil, could be fruit, could be sugar cane, coffee beans, or whatever, is relatively more easy. Today, we are in this convergence period that probably could be very interesting to see what exactly happened. It's not rare that many of the new ventures that are emerging in the region, first, fintech, that is also very interesting to see because are strong gaps in the population that don't have access to financial services, and with the use of technology, we can enhance the connectivity of the people into the financial services, that these financial services are taken in account by relative new ventures that are growing a lot. This is interesting to see. Let's see what happened with the fintech sector. But today, there are more and more new ventures that are emerging, for example, e-commerce, logistics, health tech, and other relative very interesting sectors that probably today have the opportunity to make the catch-up. And obviously, it's important to maintain, you know, the hen with the golden eggs that are obviously our natural resources. Latin America will be and continue to be one of the global repository of natural resources. That is okay, but this need to be accompanied with more sophisticated manufacturing process and obviously more knowledge-based new ventures.
Thank you very much. That's great. So, you know, you may want to ask this question: what have we learned about the world building this index? And one of the most interesting things we've learned is that the spread of digital technologies is much faster than anybody ever imagined. This merging of the entrepreneurial and digital ecosystem is expanding, depending on which number we use, between 3% and 5% a year. In other words, in 10 years, there'll be almost a complete integration of the digital and the non-digital world, right? As I said in my earlier comments, the ground is shifting underneath us at a pace that we can barely imagine. So Stefan, what can you tell us about this rapidly accelerating digital world, and perhaps how is it going to affect countries in a place like Latin America or other developing places?
Is it working? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think that I had the answer from the beginning. What I always hoped that this wave of digitalization will be merged with the actual industrial world. So that was my dream, that soon all countries will take all these technologies which are created and apply them in the real world. So connect the physical world with the digital world. Because as for now, we just focus on the digital world, but we don't see much the impact it has on the industries themselves. So that's why you do not see much effect of the productivity as well, or improving people's life. So taking these technologies and applying it in different directions would have much more visible effects, like through this process of digitization, yeah, where you take a physical process and you make it digital, like a digital service. Like one common example was the one of wheels for trucks. Yeah, you don't go and buy a new pair of wheels; you borrow them. You rent them, and you pay a specific fee, and you have a service. So also a servitization through a digital service. So also recently you can see a lot of growth in these robotics applications of AI and also of digital technologies, because digital technologies use AI and the physical world. So now you can see lots of robotics and an industrial application of robots growing mainly because of these digital technologies. So that, I think, is where countries like Latin America should focus, trying to make, automatize, and produce new products and services through this combination of technologies. So yeah, that's basically the direction. Because if you look at the models, initially, these GPTs were so popular, huge growth, but now when you look at the application, you see a radical exponential growth in the robotics application of machine learning and AI. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's what I can say.
I think it's on.
Thank you. Yeah. Actually, I just wanted to add to the idea, increased application of GPTs or machine learning, LLMs in general in robotics, is because we humans are slow learners. It's true, the technology has been rapidly adopted, but the promises of these technologies are still to come because we're slow learners. We tend to ask GPTs how to fry an egg, and we believe that this is a efficient question, and obviously it is not. The productivity gains of these technologies are still to come when we finally learn how to combine that technology with our skills, which takes us back to the second idea that I wanted to put on the table again, the education, the literacy role. Some countries are investing fat sums of money, in my personal take, correctly invested, in teaching kids, school kids in elementary school or junior high, to learn how to use these technologies, AI tools, or any LLM, or something connected to LLMs or AI. And some countries are not doing that. They're just waiting for the people to reach the university level, or the university facilities, to welcome these people with a red carpet and an AI course, which is fundamentally wrong too, okay? This creates, my humble opinion, we are just seeing how a gap is created in the future. We're just observing today how the gap is gonna look like 20 years ahead, or one generation ahead, that now generations are more than 30 years, okay? So these are two problems. On the one hand, increased application of these technologies in robotics, because it's fantastic. The accessibility to technologies is incredibly better and easier than before. But at the same time, we are observing countries creating gaps today that are going to become evident or visible 30 years ahead. And that's a problem.
None of this would have been made possible without 𝗏. 𝗏 has spent, other than us working together on this for years, he has spent the last 7, 8 years figuring out this Digital Entrepreneurship Index, which seemed like a really easy thing to do when it was first conceptualized. But it took 10 years to really figure it out so that it actually is a useful tool. Now, here's what's really interesting. The question is, does digitalization lead to convergence globally or divergence? That's a great question, right? Economic theory told us for years that there would be convergence, but we actually didn't see it. And then the question is, does this digital technology lead to convergence, right? And one of the things we see in the data is that the greatest gains are being made in the poorest countries, right? Africa, Latin America, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the smallest gains are being made in Europe and the United States. So in fact, it looks like there is a fairly rapid convergence going on. Can you comment on that, 𝗏?
First about the creation of this kind of index. So it's and we could see a perfect application of this kind of index. This index is not a panacea, so it doesn't solve all the problems. That is built as a diagnostic tool, yeah? And because a sophisticated diagnostic tool, I would say, yeah? So it's not a simple micro, or even you can see the microscopes, yeah? So it's what is the difference with the classical microscopic lenses and an electric type of microscope. So that's the difference between a classical type of viewing the world in a simple way and putting it something like to a more sophisticated view. And one of the things really that we can diagnose to examine this kind of digital divide across countries. And there are several things how to view it. And one of the things that we could see that the absolute, or not just the absolute, but the relative changes was the largest in the poor countries that are on the bottom. And one of the reasons is that the basis is very low. yeah, and it's very much easier to step up, for example, from 10 to 11 or 12 than from 100 or for 90 to 92 or something like this. So that's one of the things. And in this case, we can see some kind of convergence. Yeah? But if we examine a little bit closely this index, what we could see that there are some countries who are really leading in that one, in the overall index. However, there are some kind of structural differences, for example, in the leading US or some kind of leading European nations like Denmark, yeah, that as Zoltán told us, the US is more focused on the digital technology entrepreneurship part, while Europe is more keen on and more worried about the regulation and something like the wealth of the people who are the users who are not really well protected probably from this kind of multinational and big companies. So looking at this one, we can see that the difference between, for example, the US and Denmark, and if we go down even to Chile and others, something like the 50 places, is not so big. But then we can see that there is some kind of gap. So there is probably something like a threshold that this, something like a glass ceiling that this kind of nations should spend. So that's something like probably the challenge for Mexico, and probably that are on the second layer of this kind of thing. So it's Brazil, Mexico, Argentina to step this kind of step ceiling. And in the lower part of that one, what we can see, it's even the digital infrastructure is not well developed. So that's something like would be more development in the digital infrastructure and more development in the basic skills of the users. Yeah. So that's what we can see. Generally, I can see that some kind of world organizations, yeah, even OECD or IMF and others, have some kind of generous suggestions. Yeah, improve upon the digital literacy, improve upon the digital infrastructure, but much less is told about to improve upon the entrepreneurship part. Yeah, and what's happening here? There are now much stronger of this kind of the big five companies they are taking over all around the world. So what is happening if you are not developing your entrepreneurship domain? These kind of big companies capture your market, and the users are using the services of the Chinese and the American kind of businesses. Yeah, so that is happening. And in addition, if you don't develop that one, you face that your businesses cannot develop there, and they are moving to Silicon Valley, yeah, or some kind of developed places. So these are the other challenges that I think we need to solve, and this kind of digital entrepreneurship ecosystem index help you to monitor this kind of progress, probably, and we can examine their effect.
Well, thank you very much. Well, let's open it up for questions from the floor.
Yeah, hi. So I would like to ask that, as far as I know, that in Latin America there are quite some really great startups and unicorns, much more than in Europe. And so, I mean, if we just take these examples, then it means that Latin America is much better in entrepreneurship than Europe. More comparable, like I'm just saying that. So there can be many reasons, and I'm interested in the reasons because, for example, in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, they have now better video program than Google. So I mean, it's just unbelievable things. So I don't know if you can explain that, or you have some insights about that, because we know about the European situation and what the problems are here. But yeah, so I mean, can it be more creativity or other things in these Latin American countries that could be some really great companies coming out from there? Thank you.
Let me put two very good examples that it's probably quite related with the specific dynamics of Latin America. Let me retake the fintech sector, okay? Because historically, in the last 40 years, there is a huge institutional gap between the people that have access or could have access to formal financial sectors, and the informality is huge. So somebody emerged with the idea to combine digital technologies, fintech, with the ability to close this institutional gap and start to merge these neobanks, okay, that are banks that are not in the traditional business model like a formal bank. That, by the way, 80% of the formal banks in Latin America are from Europe, okay? It's also curious because, you know, again, the heritage. So basically, Spanish banks shape 60% of the formal financial markets in Latin America, plus a couple of American and Canadian banks, and that's all, okay? But this gap, the fintech gap, start to merge very quick, okay? And we have now these unicorns emerging very quick, that Nubank from Brazil, that is also a very interesting phenomenon, that, by the way, today, Nubank from Brazil is the largest financial single firm in the whole Latin America, okay? It's largest in terms of market valuation that Itaú, formal bank, Santander Bank, and BBVA, that is from Spain, operating in Latin America. Merging Itaú, Santander, and BBVA together are smaller than the valuation today of Nubank, NEU Bank. It's amazing. Also, it's a very good example of we can make the catch up and try to look for, okay, what happened immediately? A lot of fintech running around. Okay, there is a space for, I don't know, a couple of other dozens of fintechs. I don't know. This is the problem, because again and again and again, the copycats emerge pretty fast. But at the same time, there are other opportunities. Other good case is Mercado Libre. Mercado Libre is the large e-commerce platform in Latin America, competing with Amazon, okay, today. And it's a very interesting movement, because Mercado Libre provides a platform for a small business to be incorporated in e-commerce. And at the same time, the next movement in Mercado Libre is very interesting, because they transform also in a fintech. But today are also transforming in a logistic hub, like, you know, other large players in the world, like DHL, like, you know, what is the name of the American ones? No, I forget, DHL and the other large, FedEx, and UPS, okay? Mercado Libre is now competing in this arena with the use of technology, and this is also very interesting because can incorporate a lot of small businesses into the digitalization. Okay, what is the message here? Obviously, there are very good opportunities there. Very good opportunities, because we have a large markets, fragmented markets that could be, you know, something that not necessarily help, but at the same time, it's a very nice opportunity to incorporate more firms into the digitalization world in the global value chains. Obviously, there are different things that we need to solve, but these only two examples, for me, is my particular point of view, open the possibility, you know, to understand pretty well the real capacity of the region to improve in a relative short term to the rest of very important activities. For example, health. Health is a big problem in the region. Okay, it's a very, very big because it's fragmented, no universal insurance system, the good health is extremely expensive, and so on, okay? Health tech is growing incredibly in the region, okay? And using a lot of innovation based on technology and the combination of some specific resources, it's moving very, very fast in order to provide a very, very good opportunity for a lot of population in the region, and there is a lot of opportunities for startups to move forward into these specific sectors. And there are a lot of different things that we can do it, and let's see what happens. See the full glass approach. I'm convinced that with the help of these new technologies and reducing these institutional gaps will be a lot of good opportunities for the region. We need to work. We need to work.
Maybe, just to complement this idea, when you see large businesses that become anecdotal examples and a long list of business exits, is the perfect manifestation of a market failure, no? Now you have a dominant player, 20 failed, or try to do something similar, but fail miserably, or not that miserably. But the markets, digital markets that tend to become monopolistic, with a large list of failures, is the classical example of a market failure that is capitalized by one single player, and there's no space for more players in that market, no? There is an interesting study, no need to get into the details, but he put it very simple. Those guys said, in standard markets, we love competition. Actually, we understand that competition is better for consumers. In digital markets, looks like oligopolistic or monopolistic positions are better to the consumer. And that is something that people are still trying to figure out how it works. And these anecdotal examples, with a long list of failures and exits, it's probably one of the manifestations of this failure in the market and the novel market structures. We're talking about a novel market structure. Different rules, different assets, different sources of economies of scale or scope, etc. It's interesting to study.
Time for one more question because the sandwiches have been unpacked.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ned, presenting a master student from Model University. First of all, congratulations for the remarkable report that you came to, and I believe that as any official of any of governments from these countries, I would be very happy to have this report and kind of to benefit from it in coordination with professionals around the world, and to see how the fastest to improve my economy and how to place it as a big competitor in a world market. First observation, there was the research period from 2017 to 2022. Just after 2022, there is like still a couple of years that stayed as a gap. Just maybe if you have any kind of insights, what was happening, at least in a couple of countries that are leading as per your index. And obviously, like it's a wide space to talk about so many effects and influences from different things. I was in Mexico by the chance and traveling around Latin America, and obviously I think it's the best way to meet the country, to be on the streets, to meet with the people, to see how they are living day by day, and actually to experience what's actually happening in that particular country. And I can definitely say that with the level of development, there is so much space as something that you've seen heads-on over there, but definitely it's something that they can benefit from. So just that part, poverty as well is a huge, let's say, showstopper, and obviously to become entrepreneur in Mexico or some even less developed countries, and to enter the market, you need to know the players, and obviously I would say the way of thinking and the way how, as a country, you can benefit and develop yourself should change them to interact with their own people and make them kind of all stand together. It's something that we have in our country as a phrase, like, don't be sad for other ones that are successful. Let's grow together, let's pull up each other. And I believe that it's more about changing the vision of the people around. So, yeah, that would be from me. Congratulations one more time, and thank you for this amazing, remarkable report.
Yeah, thank you very much. So what happened over the last 2 years, we just added the new data. So, and frankly saying, I didn't have time to look at Italy. What I can see from the ranking, in the ranking, there is basically no change. So the same countries that led this one, and that's in some sense is not really good sometimes, because you see that it's a frozen type of thing. So, and the relative change of even the leading countries, Chile, Uruguay, and what was the third one? Brazil, it didn't change too much. So there are something like around the 38, 37, 38 to 40 places, yeah, like that one. And so what we could see that this kind of development is so one way to another or 1 year to another doesn't change too much, and everybody is trying to speed up in this case. That's I can reinforce that it's still this kind of speed is going up there. So please give us some time to evaluate the results because that's is still in this kind of, I would say, in the beta phase. Yeah, so it's we have some initial results, but we still need to check that one. Yeah, maybe you can add some.
And also, as Stefan just mentioned it, we need to see the effect of the artificial intelligence into productivity because it's very early to see what exactly happened. Obviously, everyone is following what around AI, but it's hard now to measure the real effect on productivity in some specific sectors, okay? Because today we are saving some time, but we discussed yesterday, probably the people even could be more productive or, more lazy because the chat is doing a lot of different things and is not translated immediately into the real economy, by the way. But yeah, we are now processing new data and see what exactly happened. Will be an improvement in some way. And remember, in Latin America, we love to change from this spectrum to the other one, okay? In terms of politics. So this day we are here, and the other day we're here, and return here. Past year and this year, half of the Latin America countries changed radically from one spectrum to the other spectrum in political terms. Let's see what happened, because it will be interesting to see the policy effects about that, and obviously the geopolitical environment is also shaping all the world, but specifically Latin America, because we are very close to United States, and United States are transforming some of the industrial policy. Let's see what happened. And obviously this is close related with many of the activities that we have. Specifically, Mexico, these weeks will start to renegotiate the free trade agreement. Let's see what happened. Canada probably say something, but Argentina is also moving very fast. Brazil is doing outstanding things in terms of technology. finally, Central America looks like a common region that could make something interesting. All is an evolution. All is an evolution. Fascinating times. Let's see what happens.
Okay. Maybe we merge Mexico with the U.S. Yeah, so Mexico is becoming a state of the U.S. So that is a completely different.
Any more questions?
Be careful, be careful. No, with the mic.
Hi, professors. I have a question just now. During the presentation, you mentioned that Latin American is not, it doesn't work as a region itself, but different countries, but within another framework of BRICS, Brazil, China, I think India, BRICS. So within this framework, is there any cooperation that address this dimension of a digital entrepreneurial ecosystem that can cooperate or support each other?
The idea of BRICS is emerged like, the emerging economies that are, continue growing very fast, including Brazil, okay? Like a huge single market. It's true that this group of, there is a new ones that are emerging, including Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey, and I forget a couple of other countries that are growing very fast, not only in terms of population, but also in terms of economic development. But yeah, again, the problem is that we're still fragmented, okay? Even there is a Mercosur, for example, an idea of integrated market that include Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Chile, and Bolivia and Ecuador, and Peru, sorry. Also there is geographic barriers, okay? That is not easy to, it's completely different like here in Europe. So in 3 hours, you can cover six countries without any problem, and very good logistic transportation systems and so on. Just to move one single truck from Brazil to Chile is a nightmare, okay, in terms of logistics, okay? This is something that we need to solve, obviously, first. We are moving, but and again, institutional barriers. Brazil itself is, very huge. They also speak different language. This is Portuguese, okay? The rest of Latin America speak Spanish, and some islands in the Caribbean speak English. But it's also very interesting that we believe, Latin America is a party all the time. Not necessarily we have, the same cultural heritage, even though it's common, but not necessarily something that we cultivate if you compare with other emergent regions like Southeast Asia that is really more integrated, or Europe that is the paradigm of integration. We try to move forward. Let's see what happens.
One last question here.
Yeah.
Let me just have one thing about that one. So it's something like this kind of commercial things and others solve only the problems of the physical products. However, most of economies belongs to the service sector, or produces most of the service sector, and that's now is more digitalized. Mm-hmm. So that's something like that we should take into account in this case. And I think this kind of service provision, you buy ChatGPT from whatever it is, yeah? So that is, so we have physical products, but this kind of service is much more important.
Okay, I had one last question. I actually had about 20 questions I've written down, but given the time, yes, I'll just stick with one for Dr. Stellan, actually. On the topic of robotics and advanced manufacturing, particularly speaking through the context of a developing region like Latin America, as those technologies advance, why wouldn't the developed countries just localize manufacturing?
Developed countries?
Yeah. So in that sense, if Mexico is saying we're going to be the advanced manufacturer for America, if everything is just done autonomously, then why wouldn't America just say, we'll have a Zara manufacturer outside of Chicago in a warehouse, instead of doing,
Well, that's a fair question, and we see that happening. So there is no more offshoring, but there is this process of reshoring, I think that's the term, where countries try to close in, yeah? So they start producing locally, they don't engage that much in this globalized trade, because there were also benefits from this, but there are also negative consequences of being too open, too globalized. So this happens. So we will see industrial, so countries will create their own industrial strategies, will become more local, and yeah, so we will see that. Yeah.
Just maybe. Thanks. Just maybe. Just a couple of things. Reshoring is costly, okay, for many reasons. And in Latin America, there is a tremendous misalignment between the evolution of policy, according to the government in charge, okay, chairing the country, that might create benefits for international organizations that might last 20, 50, or 12, or 25 years. If you decide to do reshoring, you indirectly losing those benefits, okay? Moving one corporation, a huge corporation, we're talking about business, large corps, okay? If you move a big corp back home, you need to include into your analysis, or whatever that is, the benefits you're losing for being in that country. There are examples of countries that offer free electricity, free services, and free things to big corps if they stay 20, 30 years in the country. And then they renegotiate the deal. But the misalignment, what Ernesto put in a very clear way, moving from left to right, right to left, this also changes the deals with the big corps sometimes, okay? And sometimes big corps basically wait for a switch, no? They're just waiting for swings. If the country swing, maybe you get benefits. If it doesn't swing, maybe you don't get that many benefits. But the benefits that these corps lose go in parallel with another problem or benefit, depending on which side of the border you are. Sultan just put it at the very beginning, and we saw the numbers also during the report, and it's in the report. Adoption is growing exponentially. Every single country is going to have the capacity to have the technology necessary to automate any production process probably in 10 years. Why to do a costly operation like reshoring if you just have to wait a little so that the country, develop or not, is going to have access to all this technology? I mean, it's relatively costly and relatively pointless, okay? It is falling down in the US. Yeah, in the US. But in the rest of the world, in the rest of the free world, let's say. Cheap labor and benefits. Well, at the moment, how is it the tax to the machines, no? That word that we have these days debate the other day? Is it a tax to capital or to labor or to both? Yeah, it's complicated, this approach, okay? The phenomenon is complex. It's complex.
Let me finish up, and then we'll have some sandwiches. This question of global integration is an old question. And the last great economist to argue against it was John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. He argued that there really shouldn't be any trade. He said goods should be homespun, right? That we should make things at home and we should travel and enjoy each other, but not engage in economic activity that can lead to all sorts of issues, right? If you looked at the post-war period, half the world did not engage in globalization, right? The socialist countries, I don't know if they read Keynes or Marx, but they did not engage in this. And even in the West, there was some, but it was not at that level, right? And then we ended up with the 1990s, and there was a huge movement. And if the world works perfectly, it makes all the sense to specialize everywhere. If some things don't work that well, then you have to retreat. So this is the world we're in. We're reevaluating some of those things, and it's anybody's guess if this is going to accelerate or slow down. And then the question is, what role? See, because we've digitally connected the world, right? This is the most, if there's one thing that's amazing, is the whole world is digitally connected. Everybody has a smartphone, and if you go to the most backward places in the world, there are cell towers everywhere, and everybody's online, digitally connected. So we're in this very interesting time. Anyway, we can continue discussion over sandwiches. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to the audience.
Muy interesante, ¿eh? Bueno, hemos visto aquí.